sign-up sheet, you just sign your name, print your name. I don't have the normal sign-up sheet today. Just place your name where it says name. Great. Welcome everyone to the Friday Transportation Seminar. Today we have Amy Parker, who is the coordinator for the Orientation Mobility Program here at Portland State University, and Pratik Dujari, an engineer at Intel.
Hi everybody. I'm Amy, and I am a new program coordinator here at Portland State University. Pratik and I are new partners to each other, new collaborators. So you'll see us kind of going back and forth on the slides today and talking through some ideas together. But we felt like we couldn't do participatory design and really talk about this topic of intersection and what is orientation and mobility, and how does it have a nexus, a natural nexus with design, with urban planning, with transportation, and how do members of the community, like Pratik and other people around the world who are blind, how are they a part of that dialogue? Because this is our community together. Okay, so we'll get started.
All right. Thanks, Amy. So I'm excited to be here. So as Amy mentioned, in case for those who didn't read my bio on the page today, but like I'm completely blind. I have no light perception, and I'm the only engineer who's completely blind in all of Intel. So that's a pretty exciting place to be, I guess. Definitely paradigm challenging, and I'm very excited to be here. I think we would want our talk today to be really evocative for you guys, and where you walk out of here curious, and wanting to, and with some a more level of understanding, of course. That's the main idea. So that's the focus of our presentation, to evoke thought and ideas, right? And there's lots of research to back all this stuff up. Again, slide 2.
We are.
So some questions for you guys to think about. After this seminar is over today, and sit with it and see what you think about it. So what do you guys imagine? What do you imagine about people who are visually impaired or blind? Do you notice them? Do you not notice them? What is your imagination from movies, whatever? What do you imagine? How much do you know? What do you know about orientation and mobility, quote unquote, orientation and mobility? I know one easy way everybody can connect to, most people, even if you're walking on the streets or say on a hike, you're trying to use the GPS to orient yourself, and you're moving from one place to the other. O&M in our context is specifically referring to orientation and mobility of visually impaired and blind people. But that's the aspect we're going to focus on. So what do you know about that? What do you understand about the word participatory design? There's some broad definitions, but are there specific things about that? Specific things in the definition that you may know about or you may not know about. So what do you know about participatory design? And I guess a what if thought is, what if streets and the local transportation systems, public transit, streets, all of that, was designed to be universally usable and accessible for everyone. Let's move to the next slide. So, some perspectives on what kind of dialogues you can have when you're designing a transportation system or a street system. So I'm completely blind, and I'm looking at it now, and probably everybody in this room uses the internet at least moderately, if not a lot. I'm aware that a whole bunch of you here today have your iPhones and tablets, right? All internet connected. So 9 out of 10 times, when anyone of you have used the internet, each time you use the internet, 9 out of 10 times I have worked on that particular computer processor to enable that piece. That's what my team does, and I have a specific role in that team. So when I'm working at Intel, I'm thinking, hey, this product that I'm designing or working on, how is it's going to affect the lives of millions of people? So how can I make it so it's usable to everybody's internet consumption needs, right? Everybody uses the internet differently. They use this computer. We all use computer now. So with that experience, it's something to think about when you're designing a transportation system. How do you design a transportation system that's, I guess when we're saying transportation system, we mean public transit and the streets, right? And the whole ecosystem to support that, including apps, etc. So how do you design a transportation system that's going to be universally accessible and usable? Amy?
So these are just some thoughts, and Pratik and I wanted to have for you to know who we were in presenting to you, because there's some research about if you know the people that are presenting to you, you have more cognitive hooks in your brain about what this person is saying, what context they're coming from. So on the screen right now, there is an image of what some of you are very familiar with, what they call popularly the short bus, right? The short bus that special needs kids ride on. So I have a doctorate in special education. I'm starting a new program at Portland State University in orientation and mobility. I studied at Texas Tech University to get my doctorate. And I also happen to be the sister of an individual with multiple disabilities, with visual impairment. And when I was very young, Melody was one of the first that was being allowed children with special needs to go to school. So although historically many of you, I'm just gazing around the room, you may have been to a school for the blind, you may know about schools for the blind. They have a much longer history in the United States. There's Perkins School for the Blind, which is quite famous. But Melody was a child with multiple disabilities. We grew up together. So every morning when I would go to school, I would ride on the big bus. And when she would go to school, she would ride on the short bus. We were going to the same building. We were going to the same school. So you can imagine what is communicated through transportation. And of course, it was revolutionary at the time in the early 70s for Melody to be able to go to school. So I come from a background of civil rights and thinking about it in a very personal way, what it meant for Melody to be able to go to school. She also happened to be physically in a classroom in the school that was segregated from all the other children in the school, except for those that had special needs. So today, when we talk about design and inclusion and participatory design, we have a disposition, Pratik and I do, that inclusion actually makes all of us stronger. That if all people are able to participate and access transportation and access the world around them and have better economic health and participation, it's better for the whole ecology. It's better for us, although we might not think of it that way to begin with. So what is orientation and mobility? Pratik has outlined it just so beautifully. Orientation, as Pratik said, is an awareness of one's position in space, how one moves through that space. We all use orientation. I was using orientation even to access this building. This is an interesting building design. It's very visually pleasing. It's not as easy to necessarily navigate in if you can't see or if you're not familiar. It's not standard. So the staircases aren't standard. There's some gaps between them. It's a beautiful visual design, but there's some other elements to the design. On the screen, there's an image of an elementary school age girl with light brown skin. She's traveling on a rural dirt path internationally. She's using her long cane on the journey. So people use orientation all over the world. This is orientation and mobility is a set of concepts, skills, techniques for safe and efficient travel, particularly for individuals with visual impairment, including deaf blindness. This little boy on the screen happens to be deaf blind. He has a different experience than my sister in attending school. He's much younger, obviously, and going to school currently. He's holding his cane and he's waiting for the bus to access the bus. He's also deafblind. So he's holding a low-tech communication device, and he's learning to communicate with the driver. So I'm advancing the slide, and this slide is O&M tools and devices. So many of you, I can take a little visual cue and I'll communicate with Pratik. How many of you have seen people who are blind and visually impaired in Portland traveling around with canes or dog guides? Okay, these are some of the familiar tools. And of course, in our new program at Portland State University, we're teaching people who want to become orientation and mobility specialists. And as you know, as Pratik mentioned, global positioning mobile apps are used regularly. So this is just information for transportation designers that O&M specialists, like many other professions, are guided by a code of ethics. They have a specific set of knowledge and skills that is nationally recognized and internationally recognized. It is in law, in IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, that orientation and mobility is a related service. And some of you may have had more familiarity with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which provides open access, inclusion for people with disabilities. There's an image, and this is a Portland image of two women traveling on the sidewalk and negotiating street furniture, and one of them happens to be using a cane. I'm moving a little rapidly here, but all these slides will be available to you and accessible in an accessible PDF. This is just information that there are certifying bodies in the United States for orientation and mobility specialists. So if someone says they're an orientation and mobility specialist, it's appropriate for you to ask, how are they certified? How are they trained? There are about 20 programs in the United States for orientation and mobility specialists, and Portland State has one of the newest ones. So our funding, I'm just letting you know that it comes from the U.S. Department of Education. A small grant has been afforded to Portland State University to launch Project Comet. And we are looking at orientation and mobility through an equity lens. So as I was sharing with Lisa Patterson and other colleagues, we're interested in partnering in the community and partnering with you all, perhaps as designers, students, engineers. How can we design accessible environments, both indoor and outdoor? How can we use accessible technology? How do we create affordable transportation? How do we create available transportation in rural areas? We are so lucky to have a transportation center at Portland State University. It is truly the envy of many universities around the United States to have this kind of focus and this kind of dissemination. So it's such a blessing to me, it's fortuitous, that this new program in orientation and mobility is housed here at Portland State and partnering with TREC. So some of the data, as Pratik and I were talking, this presentation is more about partnerships and intersections. It's about evoking opportunities for us to work together and maybe seeding some of your thoughts, like a TED Talk might do, to inspire you to think about the future and what you want your life in design to be like. So it's not data heavy is what I'm saying. But on this slide, this data that we gathered, there is a tremendous need for orientation and mobility specialists in the Pacific Northwest. This is the number of certified orientation and mobility specialists in Oregon. The number is 27. In Washington, 51. In Montana, 18. In Idaho, 12. In Hawaii, which we also are funded to serve Hawaii with our federal grant. We have students that take classes online and come in the summer. There are 2. And then in Alaska, there are 8. Yesterday, I had a really very emotional conversation, but it was a very positive conversation. I was in Seattle at the Seattle Lighthouse for the Blind, and I was talking with a woman who was deaf blind. And she was talking about what orientation and mobility means to her. And as a new coordinator, she was saying to me, it is so important to have orientation mobility. Because what it means is, and we know this in research, it means that I can get to my job. It means that I can get my mail. It means quality of life for a lot of people. But it also, we hope today to provoke you to think about what it means for everyone and how by thinking broadly about inclusion, you can have more benefits for everyone. So the goals of Project Comet are to train 38 orientation and mobility specialists in the Pacific Northwest, including Alaska and Hawaii. It's a lot of fun. If you think about design in this beautiful region of our country, which is very diverse, topographically diverse, culturally diverse, economically diverse, think about partnerships that you might want to have with us about what those communities need to look like. So we have a hybrid training program. I'm going to speed up because you can look at this a little bit later. I think the reason that I got this job is because I have a background in instructional design for online courses. We use multimedia that are described. Some of our participants in our program happen to have visual impairments themselves. There are blind orientation and mobility specialists. There are a few deaf orientation and mobility specialists. The majority are hearing sighted, but we don't exclude anyone from wanting to take classes in our program. If they're qualified, they're qualified. We use multimedia, video clips, podcasts, quizzes, and this is how we can spread out and reach people in diverse states. We also have people do clinical observations with partners that are available in those states. This is just information about our program in the summer. We're having 16 students come here and work here in Portland and in Seattle, where they will go through a sequence of instructional events under blindfold or low vision conditions. So all of our students, when they study online, they also come together for intensive clinical work in the summer. And that's a really nice way to bring in clinical partners who want to work with us and co-teach. So Pratik actually introduced me to one of the clinical partners who will be working with us this summer and co-teaching. In those roles, we have students under blindfold using canes, using accessible GPS devices, and looking at the environment around them. That was part of the reason why I was in Seattle yesterday. So this is one of our students currently, and I have permission to share this. She is a teacher of the visually impaired in Alaska. There's an image of her standing on a rural mountain landscape in Alaska with her husband and her baby son. But she's taking classes online, but she's sharing information in Alaska from her classes and having an influence there. And there's an image of a White Cane Day awareness board at her school. So White Cane Day is celebrated around the country, and it's a way to have the community really engaged and visible and out using white canes. It's typically in October. So we have diverse sequence of instruction this summer. I'm very excited that we will be going to guide dogs for the blind in Boring, Oregon, and having an experience there using wayfinding apps, and also engaged in wheelchair mobility, where our students under blindfold and in wheelchairs will be accessing crossing streets, learning how to do that safely through the instructional sequence. And this slide is about natural design in O&M and transportation.
Right.
Pratik.
So, thanks, Amy. So I can totally underscore the criticality of O&M, not just O&M specialists, but accessible transportation system, because when I became blind, I totally started depending upon those to get from point A to point B efficiently like everybody else, which kind of segues well into this this particular slide. So there should be some, when you or any person involved in the transportation design career or just a class or whatever, a discussion, there's certain things that are always kept in mind, right, are addressed. How do we use our senses? So, doesn't matter if you're sighted or unsighted, but there's visual. Everybody's looking at the street signs and looking around, but hey, many people have their visuals focused totally on the screen. Reading a comment on their Facebook post and not and mostly using auditory cues, right? Graphic, and then there's of course tactile. So tactile, even everybody can feel that things like curbs, curb cutouts, those bumps at the curb corners, like tactile bumps, and even the way the streets are inclined. Like the center of the every street is higher than the edges along the curb, which things like those are tactile designs that can be very helpful for everybody. So there are some things. How do we use our senses? How do we use space? So that's a very important thing. How does everybody use space, right? That's the whole idea. How do different people use different senses? How do different people use the same common space? How are they going to navigate through it or around it? For example, when I came up to this building, I had instructions, and I found that this is probably wasn't designed, but it could be more intentional. I followed the handrails all the way from much hard handrails were my landmark on the lobby area from the street to get to the elevators. So that was very discreet and simple, yet it worked for me. So that's a great example of how you can have kind of discrete little low cost things. How do you design? How do we use different sets of spaces? How do different people use the same space? And then how do we interact? How does everybody interact with the environment to achieve a certain goal or purpose? You want to go from point A to point B, or whatever your purpose might be. How do we interact with our environment, interior environment and exterior environment? How do people of all types with different abilities, technology, attention spans, etc., interact with environment? The primary motivation, and all these elements are part of the transportation design discussion already, right? The point here is, hey, look at all the different ways people use their senses, use the space, and they interact with the environment, right? And the primary motivation is uh, all this goes hugely towards offering a even, competitive, and recreational and kind of a feel for everybody, whether you're disabled, blind, or sighted, it shouldn't matter. Uh, and of course, it's a feeling of belonging. If I see these accessible cutouts or accessible street design and transportation systems, I feel like, hey, I belong to this community. We're all about community. Amy?
So how do we do this? How do we engage in participatory design? I think we've kind of set up the context for ways that we can work together. Participatory designs often sound simple, but they really engaging with diverse members of the community is complex. It's not always easy to include people. Engagement sometimes can be simple and it also can be expensive. There's an image on the screen right now, and this is of an older woman who happens to be deafblind. A woman is sitting at a table with her and is using print on palms in her hand. And if you could take your own hands right now, your index finger and your other hand, and draw the shape of English letters on your hand. That's actually how, yes, if you could feel, if you've got good senses, if you're not diabetic, this is print on palm, and imagine with your eyes closed what this woman is receiving right through the surface of her skin. Thank you very much, by the way. We have great audience participation. Okay. Okay. So we'll make sure that you get the presentation slides. Thank you. Absolutely.
Yes.
So that's the impetus behind some of these next slides. We really want to applaud the work of some partners in Trek. There's a great reference here. If you all haven't seen this webinar, if you haven't had a listen, it's on the Accessible Street Guide work that was done with the Tool Design Group, one of the leaders in our field, Janet Barlow, just to say this is tremendous participatory work that was done through the Federal Highway Administration with community members. This Accessible Street Guide is a free PDF. You can download it if you're curious about more information about what they did and how they partnered with the community, with designers. So just a special thanks to the group for that. This next image is of for people traveling in the snow, and a person who happens to be using a cane along a sidewalk in a deep snowbank, and there's a person walking behind her. So there is some knowledge that's shared. There's a reference to some of the work on participatory design studies that have been conducted. So yesterday I explained that I was in Seattle, Washington. There's an image of a map. It's a simple paper map that has some pretty low-tech markings on it in string. My colleague David Miller, who is a Certified Orientation and Mobility Specialist, or COMS, and happens to be fluent in American Sign Language at the Seattle Lighthouse for the Blind, partnered strategically with the Seattle Department of Transportation and is working on a particular corridor in Seattle that is problematic, not just for blind pedestrians, by the way, for all pedestrians, but by including David and members of the community. The Seattle Department of Transportation is really thinking innovatively about how to make the corridor safer for all people. And David transformed this map into something more accessible so that the men and women who happen to be deafblind or blind that are traveling along this route could be a part of the conversation, could offer some strategic feedback to the Seattle Department of Transportation. So that gives you some more information about that. This is a slide that's about the deafblind pocket communicator, which is a 3D printed low-tech device. I'm also going to pass around this. I like artifacts. I like it when I'm presenting or sharing for people to be able to touch things and not just listen. So this is something that I got from David that's used by King County Metro. And it's a plastic 3-ring binder, very low tech, very no tech, that has high contrast on it so that it's easy to see. And it's a numbering system for buses. And how this is used is that a person who is blind and hard of hearing or deaf-blind, profoundly deaf, can actually communicate more effectively using old school. This is old school method, right? Not the new school method. You kind of need both. And if people are not as comfortable with technology, or if it's raining, sometimes you need an old school device. So I'll just pass this around for you to look at and to think about how it might be useful. Okay, and it's got some large braille on it. But this device that's on the screen, I'll just tell you very quickly, there are some links in this presentation to more information about these tools that I'm showing you. There is a free tactile graphics library that has this file for free. That's a 3D printed file, that if you have access to a 3D printer and with the proper accommodations to the 3D printer, you could print out and experiment with these types of low-tech devices. And the real benefit to using 3D printing that I see is that if there's a nexus for design where transportation designers, urban designers are thinking about a file that can be created, printed, and shared with different members of the community, it can be another way to have a conversation, because it's nice to have something in your hand when you're talking about that. And I'll turn it over to Pratik now.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk a little bit about accessible transportation research, right? Because all the ideas and inventions usually start from research. So universal design, UX, right? Almost, I don't know if how many of you guys are familiar with it, but it's a very universal, but it definitely impacts the life of everyone in this room, because in the computer systems, in the app world, in the GUI, graphical user interface world, on any screen device, which we heavily use now, right? There's a principle of universal design and accessibility, which means it should be usable and accessible to everybody. Accessible means you can actually click on the buttons and navigate through it, and usable means it should be a pleasure. It shouldn't be tedious. It should be well-designed app screen, the graphical user interface. The same thing applies to accessible transportation. We're talking about in the context of visual impairment and people who are blind here. So I'll try to focus on that. But universal, the transportation systems, the street system, the way the streets are designed, the way public transportation is designed, different aspects of public transportation, and the ecosystem to support it should all be universally designed. That's the approach the designer should take. And there's plenty of current ongoing research. At any given point of time, there's ongoing research and expertise and technology that exists that can be leveraged by cities, towns, and the audience here, can have ideas available to you to leverage and to learn. So some examples of accessible transportation, it starts from kind of sequentially. I'm thinking, okay, like a pre-trip virtualization, right? So how about having accessible apps on your phone or any screen device, right? Computers, etc., where you can actually plan out your trip, your route, and it may give you critical information such as research on, hey, how can we provide up-to-date information like this sidewalk is blocked because of construction, or this is a one-way or that's a two-way, or I guess in terms of anything that's related to experience as a pedestrian. So there's pre-trip virtualizations, planning your trip on public transportation, how to walk to the bus stop exactly, where to find the bus stop, and the next one would be during the actual mobility experience, going from point A to point B, what kind of accessible applications you have, what are the facilities available on the street? Are there the tactile bumps? Are there, is the grid rectangular? Are the buses moving in a certain direction? Those things can be planned out. There's lots of research that makes it accessible and safe for everybody. The third area would be, I guess, things like accessible street crossings. Street crossings are the trickiest for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're sighted or visually impaired or blind. So you think like audible pedestrian signals, tactile bumps, there are all the other technologies that are now beginning to harvest or to leverage like Bluetooth and internet technology to give for the handhelds to provide you feedback at every intersection. So and also the physical basis, how the street crossing design, the crosswalk somehow tactile, are the buttons to hit to create the auditory pedestrian signal, are they conveniently located close to the intersection, etc. And so there are, and then in terms of internal wayfinding and navigation. So let's take the two most popular places where I think most of humanity in America, at least in the cities, congregates, right? Which is public spaces like movie theaters and shopping malls, multiplexes and shopping malls. So there's technology that exists and lots of research continues to be done to make it more cost effective and actually effective functionally. On indoor navigational beacons, that interact with an app on your phone. And it could be, and all these things that I'm mentioning, it has a mass market appeal, which is the power of everything that me and Amy are sharing here. So there's a lot of mass market benefits everybody. It would be awesome if you could go to an accessible kiosk where you touch the screen and wherever you touch, it spoke to you. Just like when you go to, I don't know, Disneyland or Universal Studios, they probably have maps like that we all like to use. But okay, I want to find so-and-so store, here is how to get there. And that's universal design, just an example. So those are some examples of research that are currently ongoing, which can be very influential if cities start adopting these or considering them in their design phases, and for students like you who are want to learn more about it, pursue a career, to be more innovative in this field.
Absolutely. I would say that Pratik's done a beautiful job. This website from the U.S. Department of Transportation talks about innovations in research that you can access. There's also some smart paint, actual smart paint in the world and it can give people with visual impairments information. So there's all kinds of, talk about
electrically conductive smart paint. So very innovative technology exists out there.
Really, really nice ways. And I would just say that the advice in this process is, instead of just taking a cool idea and maybe running with it, do some strategic testing. Do some strategic testing and involve the community. See if there's some pitfalls that you can avoid along the way. And then see how it translates to someone's real life. So on the screen right now, this is a picture that really means a lot to me. This is President Obama in the White House in 2009. I share this as a participatory action research. He happens to be meeting with young adults who are deafblind, This was a leadership class that I was involved in 2009 at Gallaudet University, which is a leading university in deafness. But all of these young adults that are pictured here are deafblind. You see some signing going on where the president is speaking to the young adults who are visiting the office, and real-time communication is being provided to the young adults that they're communicating back with the president. There are also these lovely images of 3 dog guides who are visiting. The reason I show you this is that there's an incredible power for policy making and change that can happen when the community is involved with people in creating these changes. And I just want to share that having the dog guides in the Oval Office, dog guides are a very old form of accessibility. They've been around for a while, kind of widespread since the 1940s in the United States. They were actually brought over from Germany. The first dog guides were German Shepherds, mainly trained because of their intelligence. And of course, they have a very strong work ethic, German Shepherds do. But these dog guides that are here, they're yellow labs in the highest office in the land, in the White House. The other dogs, just interestingly enough, if you care about dogs, I'm kind of geeking out on that memory, is that the president was engaged with the young adults also and had a conversation with them about the dog guides, how they were trained, and was just very respectful in talking to the people who were deafblind, not just interacting with the dogs. The sentry dogs, interestingly enough, I didn't know this at the White House. So they have sentry dogs that actually protect the president, protect the White House, and they are in fact German Shepherds. So when we were invited for this very special day to celebrate Helen Keller's birthday, and we were invited to the Oval Office to have a very short meeting with the president, the young adults there, they had to clear away the shepherds because the shepherds were feeling very protective of these other dogs coming into the Oval Office. Just a little tidbit for your pleasure. This is an image of tandem biking of a young woman and a teen who happens to be blind. I know we have a huge biking culture in the Pacific Northwest and in Portland in particular. So there may be some ways that you can think of participatory design with people who are blind and with young adults, and as a part of your urban research. This slide is about how the small benefits all critique.
Yeah.
And it's that minibus, the self-driving minibus that's on the screen.
Okay, that's exactly right. So a little thing. So I live in Southeast PDX and I work in Westboro, and I totally depend upon an accessible street and transportation system to my hard, very long one-way commute, right? So I'm definitely have quite a fair amount of experience with the transportation systems in Portland metro area. Some of the things, little things, for example, it'll be things like and the robot in the bus and inside the bus announcing every single bus stop, not every 10th stop or 15th stop. This won't just benefit somebody who's visually impaired or blind and who have to depend upon. We won't have to depend upon the driver's memory. They're already distracted driving. But it also affects all of us, everybody. Everybody's engaged in conversation. People are lost in thought, doing something else, whatever. Announcements at every stop. Huge difference. On the local light rail systems, how about announcing the train has speakers outside, very simple to implement. They announce on the outside on the platform the exact line that's pulling up on the light train, whether it's going to Hillsborough or stopping at Monica, or things like that, or what color train it is. Hugely beneficial for everybody. Little things that make huge difference. How about the city has clearly a permit system where people can block off entire sidewalks or part of a sidewalk with scaffolding for whatever reason, right? Construction, street repair. They have to get permits. What if this system is made more efficient? Maybe it is, but can be always improved to be optimized and streamlined, where it directly translates tied to the internet to an indicator on the app on our phones, the GPS apps for everybody, saying, hey, by the way, this sidewalk is blocked from here to here, if it's some color combination. So there's all kinds of little things that make huge difference in planning your route. So these are some examples, little things make a big difference. I thought I'd just share a few of them with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so some of these ideas are not new. They were highlighted in the accessible street, shared street guide that I mentioned before from the work of our colleagues. Tremendous participatory work, but this has been, I was reading a book actually last night that was talking about how in the United States, having more uniformity in design can benefit everyone. As you saw, as I passed around, how much nicer is it with signage? And I'm holding up an example of a communication card that has nice black, bold print and on a yellow background. So I'm just passing that around again. That and signage and in communication, it can actually help all of us access information better than signs. I was just noticing in the hallway, information to the bathroom, there's this beautiful green paint that tells you where the bathroom is, but the print on the paint is white. So it's difficult to see. So sometimes in design, you're thinking just as simple as contrast, just contrast with paint. That's a low cost innovation that can benefit a lot of people. So to end our presentation today, we really just want to encourage you to think of the local community, the ecology right around you. This is a value in the Pacific Northwest, to think of things that are sustainable. You have access to people with visual impairment in your community. If you reach out, you can also find out who are the orientation and mobility specialists in your community. As you're designing, think of ways, natural ways that you can have meetings, regular meetings with people. I think the community can also embrace youth. So Lisa's doing some innovative work with young women, with girls in transportation to encourage. So we also have been talking about ways to encourage young adults with disabilities to be involved as transportation leaders and designers, if that's what they're interested in.
And also there, there are plenty of app developers in Portland, right? It's a kind of a budding, burgeoning, I guess I should say, tech sort of a field where a lot of entrepreneurs are coming and designing all kinds of apps for all kinds of functions. So the app developers can also be, we have a very, fairly good a developer community in Portland who can also be part of the discussion with the O&M specialist and the visually impaired and blind pedestrians to come up with kind of seamless solutions.
In fact, another researcher here at Portland State University, Martin Slobodinsky, and I have a small grant where we're looking at accessible wayfinding apps. And we're doing that in partnership with people who are blind and visually impaired, deafblind, orientation and mobility specialists to help improve design and to really understand what is available currently. So now the slide is of a young man who's traveling hallways in school. Orientation and mobility starts at birth and goes through all ages. So orientation and mobility specialists work with babies, families. They also work with older adults up until death, really, because we always need to move and get around. So it's now your time for questions for Pratik or me. And we thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you.
Any questions?
So I have one question specifically relating to one of your last comments about the apps and that's what they're used for mobility and accessibility. When you're navigating from one place to another, especially a place that you're not familiar with, what apps or programs do you use to help you find your way? Yes. So, exactly some kind of specific. Well, there's two couple of mine right. So, let's say it's a location of the president and right? Most. So, different. It's a local absolutely accessible. So every aspect of the house being and my that's what it is. And then almost the street. First of all,
be less niche to technology, but I have a statistical outlier. Most people like to use technology, right? So most of the blind and visually impaired people I know they do like these technology, but there are apps such as Google Maps is a good one. There are specific apps that are designed like Blind Square. I'm just throwing out some names which are very common amongst visually impaired people, like Blind Square, etc. I will play with the names, but these apps are specifically designed to be visually impaired and blind people, but they have a mass market appeal. And the reason for that is because every button, every text, every thing that you see on the screen can be read by assistive technology. Like my phone here, heading not found. Right? Any screen device, computers. So every single every aspect of these apps are can be accessed by my text-to-speech technology on my computer or my phone.
And just to add to that, some people, this is Amy, can have a portable braille display so that if they're hard of hearing or if this is difficult to hear, they can actually read in braille. So as it's being read aloud, then it's translated back into text that can be refreshable braille on a small device.
And there's also these jawbone, bone conducting headphones, right? For the blind person, I want my ears to be really picking up what's going around me, not have earbuds in my ears. So these bone conducting earbuds that actually sit on your jaw or wherever, I guess upper jaw, they are excellent, simple, innovative things that go hand in hand with these apps.
Great question.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And one of the things that Martin Slobodinsky and I will be just compiling out of our research is a comprehensive list. So Pratik is right, or trying to get to a comprehensive list because innovations happen all the time.
Yes.
You create a list and then it's out of date the next day, But Indoor Explorer, Nearby Explorer, which was produced by the American Printing House for the Blind. There are also blind engineers who are creating apps too and are part of that dialogue. So great question. Other questions or related questions?
I have another question.
Okay.
This might be more for you. Well, I don't think you both speak, but I don't know. So I had an instructor a few years back who was giving for an ArcGIS program, and I know at the time he was participating in some research where they were trying to develop a way for ArcGIS to be applicable to people with visual impairment, which seemed like a fairly ambitious project with visual mapping program used. I wasn't sure if you had heard about. I believe he now works at Portland State and their geography department or something like that.
That's Martin.
Oh, it was Martin.
That's Martin.
Okay. So I wasn't sure if you know if there was any progress made on that or if it's a project that they're still working on.
Could you please mention this ArcGIS? What is?
So ArcGIS is a program, a computer program that is designed for specifically creating like maps and interpreting geographical information.
Okay, for creating
You
them?
can create maps. You can also do a lot of data interpretation. You can input, for example, you can put in input census data and then use the program to map and color code visual maps to say display areas with higher and draw correlations.
Got it.
That sort of stuff.
Understood. Yeah.
It's a very
Yes.
It's a very widely used program.
So Amy, I mean, can I take that really quick? So it's ambitious, but you know what, with novel thinking, out of the box thinking, ambitious stuff, things are realized. Let me give you an example. When the solar eclipse happened in the US last year, right? There was actually an app, I forget the name and all that, I just remember what it did. But there were these cameras pointed directly at the sun and tracking the sun. It was an app that was, I guess for everybody who didn't want to stare at the sun without any dark glasses could look at the app, but especially for blind and visually impaired people, if I would move my finger on, it's a live feed of the sun on my app as the eclipse is happening, but as I move my finger from the periphery all over the screen, my screen would vibrate, right? My phone would vibrate, and the vibrational frequency would increase as my finger would move to a brighter and brighter spot of the sun, and it would reduce if I move toward the covered part of the sun during the eclipse or gradual. So just to give an idea, and this is not even without any audio feedback. So you can use a very handy combination of vibration, which is inherent in all handhelds, and auditory feedback, right? To actually give access to any of these nuances, any sort of a map that this might create.
And I was going to respond because I actually am collaborating with Martin and learning from Martin.
You are.
I am certainly not.
I give an experience as a user,
And
and
this
now
is why-
Amy is going to give her experience as a researcher.
Well, that's to be debated right now. Because
Okay.
now I'm kind of skating out on that side of the pond where the water could really, come at my feet really quickly. It could crack.
Okay, I see.
So because Martin is the one who is doing the GIS research, but from what I understand, there's a layering of information from my novice understanding. I'm more working with actual physical training of orientation and mobility specialists, and Martin is the one that's thinking about these other designs. So we have kind of a nice overlapping Venn diagram of practice. But Martin is thinking about, and others are thinking about, how do you layer and make the environment much more interactive and giving people real-time information. I do know that there's a project out of the UK called Hello Lamppost, where the lamppost can actually interact with all people. The lamppost has information, and in the environment, it's actually collecting and offering information to all travelers about where they are, about what's happening. So it's where the built environment becomes much more interactive. But I do know that Martin is the expert on that GIS and is looking at, and he may be thinking about, I think he's thinking about the way that this project with wayfinding, us understanding the wayfinding apps and market and what's useful to people who are blind and visually impaired, deafblind, how does that interface with some of his other work that he's co-creating and developed as a part of his dissertation?
Right.
So, other questions?
We've got a couple from our online viewers.
Okay.
I'll just paraphrase. One is that we're aware of ADA standards and codes. Are there similar O&M codes that are being developed? Because it sounds like you suggested earlier that meeting ADA does not necessarily mean you've met the best practices for O&M. And then the second question is, would there be a way to score, say, a traffic intersection for its level of O&M compatibility, or if you're getting what I'm saying? Are there systems for rating or meeting some standard?
Well, the second question first, I think that out of this accessible street guide creation tool, there's a logical next step to creating something like that, where there could be maybe a framework. And I would certainly defer to Janet Barlow and others in the community who have created that tool first. But I also think that in participatory design and indeed in the accessible street guide, it could be that members of the community could help with that scoring. There maybe could even be some pilot testing of people actually doing some crossings and evaluating that.
And you can, just being an engineer and working in a very data-driven world, you can totally have measurable metrics. You can identify some metrics and figure out a way to measure them for every street crossing. I think that's very doable.
And so ADA implementation and compliance, again, I think that's the other question. Some people have a compliance mindset, and you have to, that something can be ADA, American with Disabilities Act compliant, and not as necessarily be as accessible. And I think in some of the small examples that we offered, I am very certain that this building is ADA compliant. I'm certain of it in the way that it was built. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most accessible to members of the community.
Well, actually, Amy, man.
Sure.
So the way I look at ADA is essential, right? But it provides at least a minimum standard. It's a minimum threshold, not a moderate or a ambitious or a goal-driven or a driven threshold, right? It's a minimum threshold that reaches some sort of a foundation that that everybody agreed to. But that would be like saying, hey, we just have some logging roads throughout Portland, so cars can move from point A to point B. Bikes can do that, although they might have a very bumpy ride along the way, right? So that would be a minimal standard for a community. I'm just trying to draw an on-the-spot analogy, but it seemed pretty accurate to me. So ADA should always be seen as a minimum standard. People would be appalled if cycles and cars had to go on, the logging style gravel roads throughout the city, all right? But although they would provide the function. So that's the way I would look at ADA and the challenge and the opportunities that are very exciting with all the research that's available, cutting edge research and expertise and the talent pool and visually impaired people in every community, is innovating on top of that, so that not just the gains to the entire community, to people with disabilities or visual impairment is maximized, but so that people like me, partially or totally blind people, can actually contribute back to the society by being gainfully employed, which means they have to get from point A to point B, the work on time and back. So the impacts are there are a lot of ripple effects to the impact. So the ADA should be looked at as a minimum threshold, but in Portland, I feel, and many other cities around the country, we really don't want to adhere to a minimum threshold. We want to shine.
So just to follow up, I mean, are there efforts to update ADA to make it better? You mentioned paint contrast. And so you're meeting ADA, but the visual contrast isn't there. So
I think the Department of Justice and the Access Board coming to some agreement around those rules, it's still in process. And we know that with our current constellation in the federal government, sometimes it's harder to interpret regulations and to enact regulations that may be beneficial. So I think that's what's so great about the Accessible Street Guide is instead of waiting just for those access board rules, the access board is still very active. And this was a way to bring the community into the conversation about a shared street application in multiple communities and with multiple stakeholders. So not waiting because people have to get to work today and people have to live and get to the grocery store and get to the doctor and be healthy. So I think that I love the questions about, and that's kind of where we were going with our presentation too, is that there are these existing frameworks and knowledge, and then there are opportunities to bring other people into that dialogue and to analyze real-time situations.
And to create local standards instead of waiting for the politicals in DC to make a decision, which might take 15 years or 20 years, the way the government works. So at the local level, definitely using these guides, we can have, cities can have their own standards, counties can have their own standards. Like Portland has its own standards around all kinds of metrics around sustainability and the environment, right? Bike transportation. So I guess cities and counties can make their own standards around accessible streets and transportation systems.
Well, it can certainly make headway. There's a
Headway,
lady
yes.
in the front who has a question.
Oh, please.
Mary Luce, public that I come today. Well, it was about the dogs. In high school, I toured the White House, and in one of those group tours, you get the free ticket from your rep, I think, and there wasn't any discussion about dogs and German Shepherds. Well, that was, let's see, I graduated from high school in '72, so do you have time to teach me about that, or was it just a statement that you made?
Do you know, it was I love the question because it was such a privilege to be able to go into the Oval Office. So it was a little bit of a non-traditional White House tour because we were actually invited in by the disability coordinator for the President of the United States. And it was a leadership class. This is why it was kind of maybe one of the apex experiences of my entire life. And the young adults who were meeting with the president had their dog guides. And so we were able to kind of experience the White House in a different way than the typical tour. Like I never would have known that there were German Shepherds that were sentry dogs protecting the White House, except that we had this very special day. on
Oh,
Helen Keller's
thanks.
birthday. But thank you for sharing your experience.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I think we have to end at 1, so this is great.
Well, thank
Thanks.
you. Thanks very much for the
Yeah.
conversation.
Thank you very much. Good session.
Anyone needs to sign in?
I'm gonna turn my laptop off.
They're on the
Thank you very
schedule.
much. Anybody else have a question? Oh, nice.